Welcome to Crime on Caffeine. I'm your host, Erika.
And I'm your host, Allison. Thank you so much for tuning into another episode, or AKA the second part of this episode.
Yes, if you came back for part 2, you are a loyal, true fan because I know people don't. And how you know what happens?
That's what I'm saying.
I would need to know what happens. I can't.
And we are releasing them on the same day, so you don't have to wait until the next week to find out what happens. We want you to know immediately.
Yeah, so we're still sitting here drinking the same thing.
I was just about to say, we be sipping on the exact same thing we just was.
Because we literally just finished recording.
Yeah, I had to go get some other coffee in my kitchen because I finished my other coffee. So we're caffeinated. We're ready to fly.
I'm sipping kind of slow today. I'll be honest.
Honestly, I am a slow sipper. A slow sipper. But today I feel like I'm on a mission, and this girl was giving me some anxiety in part 1. So I just was sipping away.
Shall we just get into it? So, in the last episode, we talked about Miss Aileen. We talked about her crazy messed up childhood. We talked about her hatred for men. We talked about her adventure to Florida hitchhiking, and we talked about her girlfriend all the way through her murders, leading up to detectives finally piecing together who might be responsible. And who the fuck was Aileen Wuornos? On January 8th, 1991, detectives Mike Joyner and Dick Martin went undercover as bikers to follow Aileen. So she was just going from like bar to bar in Port Orange, and they just followed her the whole way through. This first night, they were working with sheriffs from all the surrounding counties that she'd committed her crimes in. So they were about to go in and arrest her right then and there. And they're like, you need to fucking chill. We don't have enough on her yet. They didn't have a murder weapon. They didn't have anything. They're like, we need this to go smoothly. Back the fuck off. So they almost ruined it that night. So the next day, they went back and they were like, I feel like we can't hold off any longer. We need to figure out a plan. So they were like buying her drinks, talking to her. They were like, you should come back to our hotel and clean up. And she was like, okay, yeah, sure. Second, they stepped out of this bar. The Volusia County Sheriff's Office arrested her for an outstanding warrant from 1986 for Lori Grody related to illegal possession of a firearm. So they were like, we're not even going to arrest her for anything that has to do with these murders because they didn't have enough evidence or anything. They're like, we got to play it cool. So let's just get her on this old ass warrant. And then they were like, now we need to find Tyria, see what she has to say, and then hopefully find the murder weapon.
Yes.
So she's in jail on this charge. She's out of service right now. So those detectives fly to Pennsylvania to speak with Tyria. She was like, listen, she told me she killed the first guy, Richard Mallory. She told me it was self-defense, and I didn't want to know anything after that. I was really scared. I don't know. She kept on coming home with new things, and I didn't want to know where she got them from. She said that the more she knew, she would just feel obligated to come forward and report her, which she didn't want. So she didn't want to know anything. She said, I was just scared. She always said she'd never hurt me, but then, like, you can't believe her. So I don't know what she would have done. So she was just scared, kind of like didn't want to come to terms with what was going on. But she agreed to go back to Florida and help these detectives nail Aileen in exchange for immunity. So she wouldn't be deemed an accessory or anything having to do with Peter Seam's car or anything like that. So they put her up in a Daytona motel, and they had her. The plan was have her call Aileen in jail and get her to confess to what happened. So Tyria would tell Aileen that her mom gave her money to fly back down to Florida and get the rest of her things. So, like, that's why she was there. And she would tell Aileen the authorities were questioning her and her family, and they were going to pin the murders on her, and she was freaking out, hoping that because Aileen was so loyal to her that this would cause her to confess because she wouldn't want Tyria to go down for it. Obviously, this wasn't happening. It was just like a little ruse. So Tyria's first call to Aileen was on January 14th, and Aileen reassured her that I'm only in jail because of this firearm position. Like, no one's going to connect us to these murders. Don't worry. You have nothing to worry about. You're good. I'm good. And she continued this for the next 3 days. And it got to the point where Eileen was suspicious that she had a wire or someone was like listening to them. And so she stopped saying as much. But she promised she wouldn't let Tyria go down for this. And she was like, if it comes down to it, then I'll confess if that means you don't get in trouble. But Tyria was freaking out. She's like, they're going to arrest me. They keep questioning me. They keep questioning my family. Like, they're going to pin it on
Mm-hmm.
me. But on January 16th, after a total of 11 calls from Tyria, Eileen finally did. She said, I don't want more to get messed up for something I did. I know I'm going to miss her for the rest of my life. And she made it very clear to detectives that Tyria did nothing wrong, but she also tried to make it very clear that she did nothing wrong, or rather, it wasn't her fault. She said everything that she did was in self-defense after all of the victims either raped her or assaulted her, and she did instruct detectives on where to find the pistol that she used in all of the murders. She like threw it in a lake or like the water somewhere, so the dive team had to go get it.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, her story was literally everywhere, all over the news, all over the country. There were book and movie deals coming out of everywhere to everyone involved, to the detectives, to Eileen, to Tyria. Everyone was getting these deals brought to them.
Yeah, I remember seeing the live footage of her walking out of that bar and the Volusia County Police being there. And I can't remember what documentary it was or what movie or whatever, but I remember that scene vividly. And it was like
There's a
actual
really
footage.
famous movie called Monster where Charlize, whatever, she plays Eileen, and it's crazy because they make her look just like her, and obviously she looks nothing like her. Like, she's a beautiful woman, but like,
Yeah.
oh my God, it's insane. If you haven't seen it, I mean, I didn't even watch it because I don't know. My mom was telling me I should watch it, but I was like, I don't know, don't like this case, so I kind of don't want to, but I just want to see it because apparently it did amazing. But Eileen felt super famous from this, and she just started just talking about her crimes to everyone around her, and her stories were just changing to just put her in the best light possible. The more she told them, the
Of
further she went
course.
down this whole rabbit hole of I was the victim, like blah blah blah, blah, this and that. So I need to tell you about this woman named
Oh God.
Arlene Prell. So this is so weird. So basically this woman, after everything came out about Eileen, this woman wrote to her and was like, "Listen, I'm born again and I know this isn't your fault. I'm going to help you. You need to fire your defense team. You need all new attorneys, all this shit." She did interviews vouching for Eileen. She was booking Eileen for interviews where she wanted viewers to be sympathetic towards her, with Eileen continuing to mold her story in a way that ultimately shaped her as a victim, to the point where this woman literally in 1991, she and her husband adopted her because she said God told her to do these things and that this woman was innocent and all this stuff. Insane. 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 Just like a random woman.
Okay.
So just really, really weird, random little fun fact. But her trial began on January 13th of the following year. She got a plea deal and agreed to plead guilty to 6 murders in exchange for 6 consecutive life sentences. But one attorney thought she deserved the death penalty, so we go to trial. First up was Richard Mallory the following day. She pleaded not guilty to this, claiming she acted in self-defense after Mallory had violently raped her, which it does come out that he was a violent sex offender, and they were thinking this would grant her a new trial later on after this, but it doesn't. Thanks to Florida's Williams rule, the prosecution was able to bring evidence from Eileen's other crimes into the trial to prove that she had a pattern of criminal activity. So you can't always do this, but in Florida you can. So this was not helping her case for self-defense whatsoever.
No.
They also had Tyria as the star witness. She was up there for a while. Was not looking good for Eileen. She told the courtroom Eileen did not seem upset or distraught or under the influence or anything after she came back the night that she murdered Mallory. She said they were just chilling, watching TV, drinking. Like, it was literally nothing.
Great.
They also had 12 men who'd encountered Eileen over the years speak about their encounters with her. They played her confession tape, in which she was like totally confident, didn't show any remorse. So just like that was probably the biggest thing that worked against her claim of self-defense. But on
Oh
January
my
27th,
God.
after 2 hours of deliberation by the jury, they find her guilty of the murder of Richard Mallory. Her response to this was, "I was raped. I hope you get raped, scumbags of America." So she was not happy. And
Well, clearly.
she was not giving up that she was a victim.
Whoa, that's a
So
bit
the
much, lady.
Yeah, so the following day it was time for the jury to decide whether or not Aileen should be sentenced to death or if she should just spend life in prison. So the state had appointed psychologist Dr. Bernard, which I could not figure out this guy's name. I looked everywhere on Google for Dr. Bernard, appointed by the state, anything, nothing. Don't know his name.
Nothing?
So Dr.
Not
Bernard,
real.
no, not real. He testified that Aileen suffered from both borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder, which we'll talk about a little bit more when we dive into the psychology. But the job of the jury here is to point out the aggravating circumstances of the crime, which is what she did that was so severe to make her deserving of death. And then they also have to point out the mitigating circumstances, which are factors that might make her less worthy of death. And then they see if these aggravating circumstances outweigh the mitigating circumstances, in which case they would give her the death penalty. So they look at everything from her mental health issues, her substance abuse problems, her upbringing, like everything to take into account. And they even like called in her siblings or aunt, uncle, whatever you want to call them, to like testify about her childhood, her mental health issues, things like that. So ultimately, the jury finds 5 total aggravating circumstances. 1, she had a previous felony conviction that included a threat of violence. Remember when she robbed that convenience store in 1981 and she went to prison for it? So that is what caused an
Mm.
aggravating circumstance here. So that sucks. The murder was committed during a robbery. It was committed in order to avoid arrest. It was heinous and cruel. It was premeditated. So those were the 5 circumstances surrounding Richard Mallory's death that made her deserving of the death penalty. They found 1 mitigating circumstance, that being her mental illnesses. But altogether, the jury deemed that despite suffering from psychological illnesses, she did know the difference between right and wrong. She knew what she was doing, and she acted regardless. On January
Mhm.
31st, she was sentenced to death by electric chair. And this was the only trial she stood for, as she pled guilty or no contest to 5 other charges. And because Peter Seam's body was never found, they were never able to charge her with this death, but it is believed she's the one who killed him. I mean, she literally had his car, the prints matched everything.
Yeah.
But on March 31st, she pled no contest to the murders of Charles Richard Humphreys, Tory Burris, and David Spears, and in return received 3 more death sentences. In June, she pled guilty to the murder of Charles Carskadden, and in February of 1903, she was finally sentenced to die after pleading guilty to the murder of Walter Jean Antonio. So,
Oof.
for the next 10 years, obviously, this is what happens when you get a death sentence. Your defense team is just like working tirelessly to try and overturn the death sentence, appeal after appeal. But she didn't want this. She ended up writing a letter to the Supreme Court asking them to waive the appeals, and they were like, okay, yeah, sure, you can fire your defense team. She accepted her punishment and what she'd done, and she said, "I'm one who seriously hates human life and would kill again." So they were like, yep, okay, sure.
Okay. Take your word for it.
Yeah. So after the 90s, they actually stopped using the electric chair in Florida. So on the morning of Wednesday, October 9th, 2002, Aileen was executed by lethal injection. At 46 years old, she was the 10th woman in the United States, the second in Florida, to be executed since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976 in Florida, I believe.
Florida do be wilding out with that. They got Bundy too.
They did get Bundy, and it's interesting because I was reading a lot of comparisons about how they treated Bundy during his trial versus how they treated her during her trial. And it's very interesting to think about the fact that, like, the jury put so much more thought into his innocence or, like, his deserving of the death penalty, Whereas with her, they were straight up just like, no, fuck you. And it was so interesting to me, like reading the dynamic between the way that they treated a female serial killer versus this, quote, charming, intelligent male serial killer. Such bullshit.
Charming, intelligent piece of actual garbage.
Literally.
But it's cool. But it's cool.
So let's talk about the psychology a little bit.
Let's do it.
Before we get into some actual research, we can just kind of like discuss on our own. If it wasn't already obvious, this girl hated men. And if anybody had a reason to hate men, it was her. She didn't know her biological father because he was in prison when she was born. He was a psychopath. He was a pedophile. And, you know, she didn't know him, but that's still her biological father. So those genes are passed down to her. And not that she even knew this was her father because she'd been lied to by men in her life, about men in her life, by her grandfather, who beat her relentlessly, was a useless alcoholic and a drug addict, pimped her out to his friends, got her pregnant, made her give up the baby, only to kick her out of the house after she gave birth, never wanted to talk about it again.
So bad.
And then to make matters worse, commits suicide, which, although she had a deep hatred for him, definitely confused and affected her. She hated men, and I think because in her childhood she always saw herself as a victim to them, it's probably why she had it so deep in her mind that she was still a victim when she killed them.
Yeah.
And I mean, let's not forget her temperament given to her from her grandma or her grandfather and her father, which obviously just exacerbated matters. And you can see how this kind of feeds into the development of her antisocial behavior. And then there's also the sexual activity that she participated in from age 11, minor criminal activities, only graduating. The older that she got, she was rejected by her family. She was rejected by her peers. She set fires from a young age. Very low IQ. Some reports say it was in the 70s. Some reports say it was in the 80s. Either way, that's like
really low.
Really low. Obviously, all of these factors, you could see how she turned into what she turned into. And on top of that, she had her mental illnesses. So, according to Wade Myers in the Journal of Forensic Science, most female killers fit into two categories. We've got Black Widow murderers and we've got angels of death. And we've kind of talked about those. I will get into them more, but the methods of female serial killers are very different than men who mostly kill for sexual gratification, things like that. This isn't something that's really seen in women. They're often more methodical in their crimes. Their crimes often go unnoticed, which allows them to have longer murder sprees than male serial killers, mostly for things like poisonings, which is really common with women, not for things that are like shootings or mutilations that are obviously going to be noticed by someone.
Yeah.
And while women account for 11% of serial murders, like I said, this is because they often go unnoticed. So they can spend longer getting away with it, and they might just completely get away with it. So that number is definitely much higher than we're able to research. Keller and Keller actually divided female serial killer typology into 8 different categories. So we've got our Black Widows. This is a woman who has targeted and killed at least 3 men, whether it's like husbands, boyfriends, etc. It's usually for financial gain or some kind of power. But they're named after Black Widow spiders, who are female spiders that often eat their partners after sex. So that's where that comes from.
I didn't
Angels
know
of
that.
Death, yeah, very interesting. I did a report on them in 3rd grade. Or 2nd grade? 3rd grade.
On Black Widow spiders?
We got to pick any animal. Why did I choose that? In 2nd grade, I did a white-tailed deer. In 3rd grade, I said Black Widow.
What
Why?
is wrong with you?
I don't know. I was ahead of my time.
I did a 10-page research paper on otters.
Oh my God. I did a 10-page research paper on serial killer typology.
I'll choose otters.
I love otters. Angels of Death we've talked about, usually in the medical field or like working as like a caregiver in like a retirement home, something along those lines, can kind of go one of 2 ways. They're either very narcissistic and they'll like bring their patients to the brink of death because they're convinced that they can save them like the last second, and they usually don't, and they usually end up dying. Or on the other side, they're looking at it as like, I'm going to kill them to put them out of their misery so they don't have to suffer anymore, kind of like playing God. think that they're a martyr or something. That is something you can kind of figure that goes unnoticed for so long. Like the amount of people that have worked in like nursing homes or hospitals where they've killed hundreds of people because of this is insane. And it's
Yeah.
so scary to think about because of just the way that nobody knows for so long. Next category would be a profit crime killer, which is when they murder for profit in the midst of other criminal activities, so like robberies, not part of a team, they specified, because that's a totally different category. So this is literally doing it straight up by themselves. Question of sanity is a category that describes female murderers as a result of diagnosed or perceived mental illness. So like Andrea Yates, the woman who drowned her babies in the bathtub, she
Mhm.
did this because like God told her to or whatever. That would be like a question of sanity. Like the only reason for those murders was because of her mental illness, like nothing else. It doesn't matter if Aileen Wuornos had mental illness, yes, but she didn't murder because of that mental illness, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's also revenge killer, which is self-explanatory. Like they're literally just killing for revenge. Unexplained, which is self-explanatory. It's just not fitting perfectly into one of these categories. And then we've got sexual predators. Some people believe that Wuornos was this category, but you have to think of it in terms of she didn't kill because she got off on it. Male serial killers, this is a huge thing. Literally, the violence turns them on. So that would be a sexual predator. She wasn't a sexual predator. She used sex to get men, but she was not, that's not why she killed. So I would not categorize her as this. And then there's also team killers. These make up like half of female serial killers, whether it's like a male-female duo, a female-female duo, or like part of like a family team. The majority of female serial killers are a part of this category. So I personally don't, I think that she is like the exception to the rule when it comes to your typical female typology, which, you know, there are some sources that say maybe what we think about female serial killers is wrong because it hasn't been studied enough,
Right.
because it hasn't occurred enough, because it hasn't been found out enough. She does have mental illness that definitely contributed to her personality. It wasn't the cause of her crimes. You know, she's one of those rare cases that honestly might identify better with male serial killer typologies, which isn't something that really happens with women. She was clearly disorganized. Like all of her murders were just completely random and impulsive, which impulsivity is a huge part of having borderline personality disorder. So definitely contributed somewhat, but wasn't the cause. Crime experts from the documentary Voice of a Killer believe that the men she killed were kind of like substitutes for her grandfather. Like I know people say this about Ted Bundy, and the women that he killed were kind of like proxies. That's the word I'm looking for. Proxies for his ex. So people kind of think that maybe this is, obviously she was nothing like Ted Bundy. She wasn't charismatic. She wasn't a sociopath, none of those things. Like
No.
not at all. But I definitely understand this kind of theory. All of the men were like older white men, and they were probably pretty similar to that of like the personality of her grandfather, because a
Yeah.
lot of them were, um,
Sexually
you know, she said she
abusive.
was, yeah, exactly. She truly was killing out of anger and hatred, which is something that isn't often seen in women. She's not totally a revenge killer because this wasn't one specific act of vengeance against, like, if she went and killed her grandfather, that's a revenge killer. But she was killing men who reminded her of her grandfather, maybe. So I would definitely, if we're only looking at those 8 typologies by Keller and Keller, I would say she's unexplained. I think that she more identifies with male serial killer typologies, and maybe she doesn't fit a perfect mold, but her killing definitely just came from like her hatred and her heart and her anger, which just like a lot of parts of her personality are things that aren't seen as much in women, just because, you know, men are raised to be more aggressive and be tough and be this and that and not share their emotions, and a lot of these things make men more angry. So I mean, I don't know, maybe we're raising serial killers, but that's a topic for
Maybe.
another day. Just comes with raising your children. If they don't learn how to identify their emotions properly or express them, it does come out in anger, and obviously this was the case for Aileen. She was a very, very angry child from the start, and she just held on to that anger, and it was all she knew.
Mm-hmm.
According to the Journal of Law and Psychiatry, women who had been incarcerated for major violent crimes were 4 times as likely to be diagnosed with borderline personality disorder than those who had been in prison for like smaller acts of violence. So things like murder, homicide, whatever. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, borderline personality disorder is an illness marked by an ongoing pattern of varying moods, self-image, and behavior. These symptoms often result in impulsive actions and problems in relationships. It is characterized by an intense fear of abandonment. Aileen had been abandoned in her life by literally every single person. So she never had a healthy attachment to anyone. She never had a stable relationship. Tyria was the only, she still said towards the end of her life, she loved her, like everything like that. I did just want to go over some like the characteristics of borderline personality disorder. Like I said, intense fear of abandonment is the central trait of BPD, but pattern of unstable, intense relationships, rapid changes in self-identity and self-image that include shifting goals and values, seeing yourself as like really bad or as if you don't exist at all, periods of paranoia with loss of contact of reality, impulsive and risky behavior such as gambling, reckless driving, unsafe sex, binge eating, drug abuse, sabotaging success by suddenly like ending like good things in your life because of that intense fear of abandonment. It's like, obviously this didn't happen with her, but like she had a really good job and she quit it because she was like scared of getting fired, or she had a really good relationship and she like fucked it up on purpose because she was scared of like being left, things like that. Suicidal threats. This is really common. Threatening suicide if someone's going to leave you because you're scared of being abandoned. Just impulsive like self-harm, things like that. All of these as fear responses. Mood swings that can last hours to days. Ongoing feelings of emptiness, inappropriate, intense anger, getting into fights a lot. So these were definitely all very clear characteristics of Aileen since she was small. The risky behaviors, the fear of abandonment, things like that. And if you look at the causes of borderline personality, there's not like one exact root cause. You know, there's environmental influences, there's genetic influences, and all of these influences kind of overlap with all of the things that we talk about when we talk about why someone is a killer. So some environmental influences are early separation from caregivers, emotional or physical neglect, parental insensitivity, physical and sexual abuse. But if you take these environmental factors and you mix them with the genetic predisposition to BPD, you're creating an environment where it's definitely bound to progress. And that doesn't mean that every single person who has borderline personality disorder had a childhood like this. It's just very common. And not everyone who has a childhood like this has borderline personality disorder. Like I said, genetics can play a role. It tends to run in families, but once again, that could just be because of the environment. But there are some studies that look at serotonin and how that could be related, different genetic variations. One study found that monkeys with the serotonin gene variation developed symptoms that were similar to that of BPD only when they were taken from their mothers and raised in an environment without the care of their mother. So obviously you can see those two factors working together to cause that mental illness. If they kept the monkeys with their mothers, they were a lot less likely to develop BPD. So that's super interesting. A lot of studies also look at brain structure, and I know it has a lot to do with your frontal lobe. They also have a lot more of an active limbic system, which is like your amygdala. So that part of the brain that controls your fear, your anger, your aggression, obviously is going to be way more overactive in people with borderline personality disorder because the entire disorder is based on fear, and aggression and anger are just two huge characteristics of it. So yeah, very interesting, all of these things that can contribute just because, like I said, a lot of these factors are factors that we've looked at when just looking at like what makes a serial killer. So I just thought that was super interesting. Jeffrey Dahmer had borderline personality disorder as well.
Could have guessed that one.
Yeah, so it's just a little tidbit about
It's
borderline
just
personality
a
disorder.
little bit of a tidbit.
Yeah, so that's pretty much all. She is
That's all she
crazy.
wrote.
She was crazy. She was fearless. What's that quote?
Oh, what is it? I don't know. I was just watching your Snapchat now. All I can think in my head is Material Girl.
Thor, guys, because I've been on like a Starbucks binge this week. Thor had his first pup cup, and he had 2 in a row yesterday and today, and he loves them.
And now he's just
He's a big Starbucks girly.
girl.
He's a material girl. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. Hope you guys enjoyed. Definitely different type of case for me, but
But it was good.
Love hearing about the women.
Us crazy ladies. No, that girl literally had done lost her damn mind, her thalamus loose and everything.
Her frontal lobe.
She ain't got no look.
But yeah, let us know what you guys thought. If there's anything I didn't include or whatnot, let us know. If you guys have some good Starbucks orders, preferably with less sugar, let us know what those are, because I need some drink recs. It's going to be a productive day, guys. I can feel it.
I don't feel that way. But like, I'm ready for it, ready for the day. Here I am.
No, you got this. I'm gonna go make sushi rice. So by the time you're hearing this, it's Friday. So I hope everyone has an amazing weekend. If you are in the Chicago area, stay warm because we've got like 8 feet of snow.
Oh boy. And if you are in any other area where there's snow, stay warm. But like if you're in Florida, stay cold.
So thank you guys so much for listening.
Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Give us a rating on both Apple and Spotify because you can do that now. And you know what? Just keep listening. Keep telling all the people that you're listening and just continue to be such great people out there and not this lady. We'll catch you on next week episode. No, but really, we'll catch you on the next episode.